Okay, let's take a look at illustrating the perspective. What I'm doing here is I'm finding the horizon line. If you were to trace the vanishing point lines back, they would give you the horizon line in the background. Now I'm going to go through, I'm going to put the stems or trunks of the trees where I've got the trees in the plan. Don't have to be super accurate with this, do this lightly. By the way, these steps are probably the most important steps in doing your illustration of your perspective. We're going to put a lot of information down here that we're going to rely on heavily as we get closer to the end. Okay, I'm going to lightly in pencil start to block out where I want the trees. Get those drawn in. I'm checking the heights of the ones here. For now, you can kind of eyeball it and see how big you want it to look near your house. These trees should be about the same height as these trees. So I'm just kind of following the building over to get a rough idea how big they should be. We've got some bigger ones here. Going to go ahead and block those out. Now I'm going to put some in the back. And one of the issues when you're doing your bird's eye view perspective, which is what this is how do you fill up the space in the background? Now I want to get some type of background line, and I'm going to do it by putting a fair amount of trees on the horizon line. So I'm just blocking them out now, putting some rough clumps in there. And a few more. I'm looking for spaces in the background that don't appear to have anything in it, because I need to fill that space. Now I'm going to start trying to frame the drawing. The same rules apply as with the elevation. You want the sky to be a little narrower than the trees, or some type of middle stripe. We're trying to set up that pyramid again. I'm going to cut the landscape off there. And I'm going to cut the landscape off there. At the same time, I'm also leaving some trees sticking out of the edge. I'm going to put the top of the sky up here. I'm going to start to darken this up a little bit so I don't lose track of where it is. We're going to be tracing over this sheet, so it's not necessary to be super light with this. Okay, there's the sides, and you've got the bottom there. I typically tend to do the bottom a little bit smaller than I think it should be. You don't want too much foreground. I've noticed there was a lot of space in the foreground. I'm adding some trees there. Now I'm going to figure out where to put the doors on the front elevation. And I'm doing this by putting an X in the front of it. That will get me the midpoint. And if I look at my elevations, I can see that the doors are a little wider than the midpoint. I can kind of eyeball, I'm just guesstimating when I look at the elevation that I've given you. And again, laying out those doors. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing where they are. You can tell by looking at it that they're a little closer to the right side than the left side. That the top of the doors, oh, okay, there I went back to the vanishing point to figure out where the top of the doors will be, and the middle of the doors. So I want to get those top windows in there. And again, that looks close to what we've got on our elevation. We don't have to be 1000% accurate here. We just want to get it so it looks like the elevation. Now I'm trying to find the center of the back plane of the wall. Remember that the front sticks out a little bit, so we want to make sure that anything we're going to center on the back wall is truly centered on the back wall. Here I'm looking to see where I think the edge of the windows might be. And now I'm going to put in the vertical lines for two of the windows. I'm going to put a window head in on each of them. I'm going to get a rough idea of the window sill, kind of based on where I thought the elevation showed the midway line. I'm going a little above that. In general, what you're trying to do is sketch onto your perspective the information that's in the elevation. Now I've got a lot of trees in the front there, so that's covering some of the lower windows, so I shouldn't have to worry about them a great deal. Now that line on the bottom windows, the bottom of the windows and the top of the windows, should be able to carry right across to the other side. So I've already set up where my side windows are going to be. I'm going to work on the leftmost windows first. Kind of judging where I think they would be. Now if you'll notice the right windows on that side, part of them appear to disappear behind the front entry. Now I've blocked out the windows on my elevation. Now I'm going to try and start taking a look at the front door. Again, I'm eyeballing where I think where that door should be and about how wide it should be. The head height should go around that building and try and match up with the window head height. That's the top of the door. I'll have the same thing happen. See, here I go back to the vanishing point. And now I'm going to do the top of the windows. I follow them around the building. And there's the window head. Now I know where the center is. I'm going to eyeball a circle in that looks to be about the right size. There again, the head of the window is about the head of the garage. I go back to the vanishing point. Back to the vanishing point. And I'm going to eyeball where I think some windows would be based on the elevation. I know in the center, from a straight line down from the peak, is going to be a round window, and I sketch that in. Okay. When we did the sketch, we didn't put any roof overhangs on, but we're going to want to indicate an overhang on the actual roof. So I put that double line in there to try and show a piece of trim and show that the edge of the roof is more than just a line. Now, in SketchUp, we don't tend to plot out the overhangs because it would be a lot of work in SketchUp, and what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of adjust the perspective to make it appear that there are roof overhangs. Excuse me. Same thing on the front entry. Put the double lines in. Block out where the overhang is. And if you'll notice, when I did the overhang, the end of the overhang, I had it stick out a little bit from the side wall. And I'll even push that side wall in a little bit when I trace over it to try and indicate that there is a roof edge. In reality, the roof plane goes back to its own vanishing point, but you don't really have to worry about that very much. Now I'm going to try and find out where that chimney is. And so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and guess that that's where the center line of the roof is. I can infer that the edge of the chimney is there. I'm just going to guesstimate that that's about where the top is. And I'm also going to guesstimate where I think the back should be. Put a line for the top, and put a line for the back. I'm going to do the same thing on this roof that I did on the house roof. Get those double lines in for the trim. To show where the roof is. I'm starting to break the garage doors down into their little panels. Again, eyeballing that. All right, we spent about 15 minutes doing that layout with our pencil. Now we're going to put a clean piece of trace over it and we're going to start inking. Doing that layout with the pencil is probably the most important part of this drawing exercise. So don't shortchange yourself on it. Spend 20 minutes, 15, half an hour to get all those elements drawn in there so you like it. So that when you're putting down the ink work, you're not thinking about, where should the trees be? Where should this go? It should all be indicated there. I'm going to be going through. I'm actually going to trace in some of the trees right now. I'm using that upside down umbrella stroke, but you can use your own trees. And I'll just keep tracing along here. Get those trees in the front. And more trees. I'll just keep putting them in. One of the reasons why I do the trees first, in particular in the front of the building, is I don't want to draw my straight lines through any of the trees. One thing with the aerial perspectives in particular is you get to draw a lot of trees because you're really trying to fill up the space around the building. I'm going to go in ahead and sketch in where I believe the line of the lake will be. I've traced part of that from the handout I gave you. Now I'm going to start doing the hard lines on the building. I'm starting from the top. I'm going to do the chimney. Now, unlike the elevation where we had a lot of straight lines going left and right across the page, in a perspective, all the lines going across the page are angled. So I'm going to try and get as many of them in as I can. We'll get the windows in. I'm using, of course, my fine Sharpie to do this, the thin one. Now I'm starting to show the trim around the garage doors. These are double lines around it. I'm going to get those back trim lines on the garage. There's the two of them. And now the front trim lines on the roof of the garage. Notice I'm using overlapping corners. I'm throwing in a few broken lines in there. I'm going to try and just put the bottom on that little trim piece. These are little things that are pretty subtle, but they make a big difference in how your perspective looks at the end. I'll box in that window. Same thing on this one. I'm doing the corner of the garage now. Defining the roof, continuing to define the roof on the big building, big part of the building, excuse me. Notice, as is the case with my earlier drawings, I put the pen down and then I slide the triangle up to it. It's to help me keep that line right where I want it. I'll put a little bottom on that trim. I'm going to do a little more work on the chimney. Try and show the little jigs and jogs on the top of it. I'll put the sides in. Now I'm doing some vertical lines. But it was mainly to help me get in those horizontal lines. There's the angled line against the roof. And then the far edge of the roof. Notice when I do this corner line, I move the line in a little bit from the edge of the roof. You can see it there in the upper left corner, and what that does is it makes it look like the roof is sticking out past the edge of the building, which is what you want it to do. Again, it's a subtle thing, but it makes a big difference in the finished product. Finishing the roofs up in the front. Tracing off the side parts. I'm going to start putting some corners of the building in there. Blocking out the windows. Gently trying to get that circular window in, doing it a little bit at a time. I'm going to go ahead and put the bottom of the building on now. Again, I did the trees. I did a little bit of the landscaping work with the lake, and now I'm putting all the hard edges in. Gently, a little bit at a time, I'm going to do that window. Notice I adjusted it a little from what I had sketched below it. I didn't like how it looked below it, so I figured now is the time to fix it. I'm going to do the front steps here. When I did the door, you'll notice I drew the walls and then I stepped the bottom of the door in a little bit. Not very much, just enough to kind of hint at the fact that the door isn't exactly flush with the front wall. It goes in a little. I'm going to do the side edges of the steps. And now I'll do the bottom of the steps. I'm going to trace slowly and in little parts that front circular walkway. Just going to kind of get the outside edges of it. I can draw these straight lines in because they go into a straight edge of the driveway. Now I'm going to put the curves in. There we go, right by the corners of the driveway. Now the curves I didn't do in SketchUp because I knew I'd just be eyeballing them and tracing them over again. Okay. Little trick with the perspective, I'm going to bring the driveway out past the border. This is going to draw your eye into it. You don't have to bring it out a lot, but you'll see there it is. Again, we leave the trees hanging out over the edges of our picture to draw our eye in. We're going to bring that driveway out a little bit to draw our eye in. Put that line in. Now I'm going to do the bottom edge of the picture. I'll do my sides. There's the top of the sky. Top of the sky. Side of the picture having trees sticking out of it. And I can move it around a little if I want. I'll do the top of the sky now. Here I'm going to slip some white paper under it, and you start to see what it looks like without all the lines underneath. It's come a long ways, but I want to add some character to it. So what are some things I'm going to do? I'm going to start adding some trim on the building. Those are those double lines. Most building corners have a little piece of trim or a double line at them. I'm going to do the same around some of the windows. Most of the windows, in fact. And, you know, you want it to be a double line. It's pretty close to the first line. You know, we're trying to represent something that's 4 inches big on a 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper, and we're looking at it from a long ways away. So I'm putting trim on the tops and bottoms of the windows. Let's get the windows on the front. There's my door trim. For the window trim, at least on the front, I might hint at a little bit of it, very gentle. And I'm going to do a little bit on the side also. Again, just hints of it. I want to get that trim around those windows too. I'm going to go ahead and show those panels on the garage door. Get those filled out. Now I had drawn those underneath on the tracing paper, so I'm just tracing them. Now on the top of the window there were some lines, so let's put a few of those in. Those are called mullions. They're little divisions in the windows. Again, I'm just kind of guessing at what's on the elevation and transferring it to the perspective. I'm going to draw a line midway, a little double line, midway through all these windows. Again. Now I'm going to try and get some of the mullions, there we go, in these windows. Now we're going to divide the top halves in half, bottom halves in half. Sometimes I kind of use a broken line and just kind of hint at these. It's tough. The scale is small, and I don't want to make the window lines read too heavy. Now let's check it with a white piece of paper. Now we're going to put in some shadows. I want to put a shadow underneath the eaves. You're going to find the shadows are going to be, again, similar to where they were on the elevation. Pretend the sun's coming from up and to the left, casting those shadows down and to the right. A little broken line in there. I want to make sure I get the bottom of that trim. Now already, just by adding those shadows, you start to see how much better the drawing reads. It's starting to lift off the page. Let's get the back shadow in there. I'm going to break it up a little, put a few professional dots in there, a little break here and there. We're going to want shadows underneath the top of the windows. I usually start at the left and work my way to the right. And sometimes I don't go all the way over to the right. Again, I just want it to be kind of loosey-goosey. Heavy line and then a few dots. Heavy line, a few dots. Heavy line, a few dots. Now I want to do it as though the sun is coming from up and to the left. So I'm making the shadows down and to the right. I'm putting a shadow on the left-hand side of any openings into the walls, which would be all my windows and doors. Thought I was going to forget about those, but there are the windows on the side of the building. Same thing, top, and the left-hand side of the window. Let's profile some of this. We're going to do that with our fat Sharpie. We're just going to go around the perimeter to start things off. trying to be careful not to drag my triangle through my Sharpie work from before. The small Sharpie's pretty forgiving about that. The fat Sharpie stays wet a lot longer. Now all I'm going to do with this profile is take it down to the ground when I get to that point. I'm not going around the front of the building with a profile. You'll see what I mean. Here I'm going to bring it down and just stop at the ground. I'm going to go ahead and put that double-edged line just like we did in the plan, where I've got a soft surface against a hard surface. I put the double line. Now I'm starting to add texture, and we're going to start by highlighting all those lines, the edge of the house, where the driveway meets the front planting bed, all the way around the driveway, and then along the back of the house. Okay, I've put a lot of trees on that back horizon line, but I still want to put a stripe in there. So this is where I've determined that the stripe's going to go kind of right on where the horizon was. And I'm just filling in the spaces between all the trees. Think of it as a mountain range in the background. There's not a whole lot of stripe on this one, but we do have a little. Okay, when I do my roof texture, go halfway on the roof, halfway on the roof. Oops, I forgot the profile around the chimney. You do want that profile line to go all the way around the edge of the building, unless there's a tree in the way. That reads better. Now here what I'm doing is I'm adding a double line to try and highlight this front entry. That roof was kind of getting lost in the rest of the building. I'm probably going to do the same thing on the garage at some point. But I'm working now on texture for the roof, halfway from the first half. And this is the same technique we use on the elevation. Do half of the half, then half of the half-halves, and then half of the half-halves half. All to dry it now. I'll put another one in there. I'm going to try and go halfway of the halves. Oh, I'm going to actually profile. I lied there. I'm going to do that little double line profile to make the chimney stand out a little. Now I'm going to do halfway on the halves. Stop and stop. Go a little, stop, go a little, stop. I forgot a window there. Let's put that in there. I'll put a little trim around there. Putting a little texture on the side driveway. I'm going to put this in the walkways. First I'm going to put a few. See, I'm just extending the lines that were there. And that helps me keep the perspective appropriate. Now I want to do one in the middle, and I can just put it between the original two lines. Here I want to put some little grid lines. I mark out where I think they should be. I go back. I'm taking these lines back to the vanishing point on the right. And there's grid lines for the walkway. I'm going to put a double line around that lake and around the beach. Now I'm going to put some grass lines in because we had all that grass out there. These grass lines are like you did on your plan. And you watch how much it fills this blank space. Again, especially with the bird's eye view perspective, which means we've drawn it as though you're up in the air looking down on your building. You wind up with a lot of green space or a lot of empty space, so we want to fill it. And my cheap grass, which we use to fill empty space on the site plan, works wonders on the perspective. Notice the difference. See how much that grass fills in the blank space? Let's get a little character in our trees. I'll put some trunks in on these trees. Maybe a little bit of debris at the bottom of the trunk to kind of hit it some grass there. Here we go. A few debris. I love putting a couple little just leaves or little backward strokes all over to kind of fill in and give character to some of these spaces. And we'll put a little leaves and loose items near some of my trees. Again, just adding character into it. Still more character. A few dots here and there. I'm going to show a few more scrubbies, and these are they're little things, but they make a big difference in the way the drawing looks. Well, I'm going to try and get a window in on the front door.